Time now to bring in our first guest for the evening, and we are delighted to be joined by NFL rules analyst and former NFL official, Mike Pereira. Mike, thanks so much for doing this.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Always for my man Moj. Always.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Moj has given you as a gift in a previous life, but he tends to be good to his friends.
Hey, he had a nice dinner at Joe Forte's. We took care of him there. Had a nice little tour up to Lions Bay. Saw the Howe Sound up there. So I was a good tour guide when Mike came to Vancouver.
You were. I mean, I know one thing. I know the first thing I would do if I came up to Vancouver again, right? Joe Forte's, here I come, baby.
Perfect. Mike, let's start with this weekend in the Dallas Cowboys. A franchise record, 28 penalties in one game. I mean, how does that even happen?
Well, it seems inconceivable. And by the way, it was 33 total penalties because 5 either were declined or offset. I don't know what to say about it. I mean, it does come from a crew, Sean Hockley's crew, that I do think is a little too technical. But I went through the game, and this is what's difficult about it. I went through the game, pretended like I was still the head of officiating, and I went through it to grade it. And when I looked at it, of the 33 calls, I felt like 30 were correct and 3 were incorrect. And then the unbelievable thing is I saw 6 more that I thought should have been called. So it's kind of one of those things that kind of balloons up. You know, there were 13 5-yard penalties that are really non-judgmental when it comes to officiating. And I just think that, and I didn't like it, by the way, but I just think that the emphasis now, you know, last year there was almost a de-emphasis of offensive holding. And then this year there's like a emphasis of it. And the number of holding penalties have just gone sky high, probably over triple as many as last year at this time. So it's the emphasis that, you know, in that offensive holding and other areas that I think have created outliers. And I do think this is an outlier, because then you take the game that followed that. So you had 28 accepted penalties in that game, and then the evening game had 8 accepted penalties. So I look at it as more of an outlier, one that we won't see very often, but it would concern me if I was still the head of officiating and I have to look closely at that crew over the first 12 weeks to see if that tendency to call more is there than other crews.
Yeah, you talk a little bit about crews having their own way of doing things and how that crew might have been a little more technical. A rule last night that left Seahawk fans absolutely seething, and that was the onside kick at the end when Ballore was on one side of the hash mark instead of on the other side of the hash mark. Clearly nowhere near the play, but there's no gray area there, is there?
No, there's not. And frankly, that was really a good call because I can't fathom, and I know that you're supposed to look at the formation, but I can't fathom being that focused on it at that time of the game, thinking about onside kick. You got to be thinking, okay, did the kicking team break the plane when the ball was kicked? There's so many different things to look at, thinking about, was it touched? Was it actually touched by Washington before it went? I'm not sure that it was. I thought the ball bounced over the Washington player. And so I didn't know what they were really discussing. And then when they came out with that illegal formation, it's a player safety thing. And that's the issue, that you have to have players 2 and 2. I call it 1, 2, and 2. You have to have 2 outside the hash marks in between the numbers, and you have to have 2 outside the numbers in between the sideline. So it was really a good pickup. And I guess I get the Seahawk fans being incensed, but that's clearly one that's a foul. And like you say, when you're lined up, okay, was that fourth guy, was he like almost in that area between? It wasn't that. I mean, he was clearly, they didn't occupy the numbers that they needed to have. And it would be one of those that if it wasn't called, there would probably be an uproar from the Washington side of the field if it had consequence.
Well, I mean, technically, yes, it is an infraction. But, Mike, I think you can call it an infraction just about every play, particularly when it comes to judgment calls. My whole take on this type of foul is does it impact the play? Did it? I mean, he had no impact whatsoever, Bellour, on the play, and he came running in late. So to me, I can understand the frustration. If he impacted the play, I mean, if he was on the left side of the field, clearly in violation of the rules, I could understand it. But that's, I think, the beef that Seahawk fans have is the fact that it didn't impact the play, and it was so, yeah, okay, he was over the line by a foot.
Mike, for the record, Moj was a defensive lineman, and in Canada we have a 1 yard neutral zone, and he was always into that neutral zone.
Yeah, well, I know. Moj, he always kind of fudged a little bit. I get it. And
I still do.
Moj, I get what you're saying, but on the other hand, when the ball's being kicked, you don't know which way it's going to be kicked necessarily, and you react to the illegal formation. So, yeah, I could say the same thing if the deep defender was the Moj and crowded the neutral zone and was offside, but it had no effect, really seemingly had no effect. The defensive hold, which happens on one side of the field and the pass gets thrown to the other side. There's all kinds of things that you could add, but to me, the kick formation was done for player safety. So you couldn't overload. You couldn't have too many kicking team members in one area. And so I get that. I mean, honestly, I get that the Seahawk fans are upset, but how about being upset for your team and your special teams coordinator? Yeah. It's a black and white rule. Yeah, all you have to do is line up right. So in something like that, where you just have to line up right, then I'm hard pressed to say, well, the officials should have used some common sense. It's a simple lineup thing, and it's not like the first kickoff. Well, they didn't have many kickoffs in that game.
No.
But it's something to me that's black and white.
Farhan is going to talk about taunting. He wants to get into that.
Oh, yeah.
My pet peeve, Mike Pereira, is when did football turn into rugby? I mean, it's ridiculous now. You see a pileup, it is basically stopped. An offensive lineman comes flying in. The next thing you know, a quarterback's in the end zone. And I understand they want more offense, but I mean, that is such a cheap way to get more yards. I just look at that, and it's one of the things that's really ticking me off about the way the game is being called right now. All this pushing from behind, which 10 years ago was illegal and now seems to be perfectly fine.
You feel better about that?
I do. I vented.
It's his D-line thing.
You feel a little bit better now after you got that off your chest?
Yes, I do.
People going back to the Bush push in college would say the same thing with you, that you're saying. It was illegal for a time. And then it actually went from being illegal to legal when we kind of said, okay, sometimes it's hard to see who's pushing when you have a big pile like that. Who's pushing it? Is it a teammate of the offensive player? Is it a defensive player? And so therefore we said, okay, it's going to be legal to push. The interesting thing to me, Moj, is that you can't pull. You can't pull a teammate into the end zone, or you can't pull them forward for a first down. Yet we see that a lot, and it never gets called. And so the whole notion of what rulebook terms aiding the runner, I mean, that's basically out the window. So it's push, push, push. The Bush push is illegal then, but legal now. But it is the way of the game.
All right, let's get into taunting, because Moj taunts me and chirps at me all the time. I want to ask you you talked about holding penalties going way up. We're seeing the same thing with these taunting fouls as well, and it's become a real point of emphasis on the league. And it's just gone too far as I see it, because you've got plays where there's nothing. We saw it in the Kansas City game a week ago where a guy goes into the end zone and just does one of these and he gets flagged for it. And after that, the league actually doubled down and sent a memo to all of its teams that this is going to continue. Why is it just so ticky-tack with this call?
Well, I'm kind of in your corner than this. I was for the point of emphasis because I really felt like that the in-your-face stuff was getting out of hand, that prolonged in-your-face type of taunting. And I know what happens if that is allowed. Then the game gets to be really mouthy and chippy, and it's tough to keep control of the game. The rule is in there. It's always been there that says if it's prolonged and in your face, then you need to call that. And the officials over the last 5-6 years really were not. And so the point of emphasis, in my opinion, was a good one. But the needle, it's gone too far. I mean, it's like when we have the situation with the Kansas City player, I think it's like, or not Kansas City, but anyways, a taunting posture. I mean, nothing was said. Nobody pointed. Nobody really did anything. The guy made a great play, right? And then he just, looked toward the opponent's bench. I just feel that they've gone too far. Now, that being said, I mean, the clubs were all told numerous times before the season started, don't put the official in a position to have to decide whether it's taunting or not. Don't do it, because he may react and call taunting. Now, I'm hard pressed to say that it's an epidemic. I mean, when maybe I didn't get the results from last week, but there were 30 called in the first 11 weeks of the season, but it's a hell of a lot more than have been called in past years. So I like the point of emphasis, but I do not like how far they've moved that needle. Now, that being said, just so you know, the pointing at an opponent as you're headed into the end zone, a wave to your opponent, you're waving goodbye as you go into the end zone, that was a foul, was taunting, and even before the point of emphasis. So that really hasn't changed, and you won't see any change in that. But I think if you went really to the committee and you looked at the types that are being called, and you said, like in that play where the guy faced his opponent's bench, do you really want that called as taunting? I do think the committee would say, nah, that's really what we didn't have that in mind. So I do think it's gone too far, and hope it reaches a point where we get a little sensible and don't, again, overreact to that point of emphasis, which I think we basically have.
Last thing I'll ask you before we let you go, and you've been great on all of these topics, by the way, and that is roughing the passer. So obviously the league wants to protect its stars, but we have seen some roughing the passer calls this year that were just not even close to actually roughing the passer. Is it time to include replay on that particular call, just to make sure that you didn't think you saw something and called it and changed the game accordingly?
Here's my feeling about that. I'm going to be running the USFL football program, their officiating program that kicks in April of this coming year. And I am putting forth a suggestion in replay that, and since I'm running the program, I have a pretty good chance of getting it passed. I would like to see replay look at personal fouls, so the player safety type fouls. I'd like for them to look at that and say, okay, we're giving replay the ability to take off the foul that's called. Not to put one on,
sure,
but to take it off. So if you take a couple of these roughing the passer penalties that we've had lately, a simple fix by just the replay guy, getting on you've got the communication with the referee and just saying, hey, that wasn't a foul. Let's pick it up. We're not going to assess the yardage. Let's go. I get worried about how far replay gets involved, but when you're talking about 15-yard penalties, whether it is roughing the passer or the hits on defenseless receivers, for example, I can see why they're called, because you're focused on the head or neck area, so I can see why they're called. But why not give the ability of the video assistant, of the sky judge, of the replay official, whatever you want to call them, give them the ability to take it off if it's clearly not a foul. And so we'll see how that works if I get the permission to do it in the USFL. And you never know. The league follows all this stuff, all these other spring leagues. And if it works, maybe the league might get involved. Look, in my opinion, there's already a sky judge, even though they call it a video assistant. But more of the focus is on the grounds, the lines, and planes. So maybe you can take it in the area of judgment and get these calls that everybody knows. My favorite group, Moj can identify with me, those 50 drunks in a bar. If those 50 drunks in a bar don't think it's roughing the passer, then it probably isn't. So let's see if we can give somebody the ability to correct.
I was just, as we're wrapping up, I was going to invite you to the big golf tournament. I know we've talked about it in the past. Your season with the USFL ends in June. My tournament's in July. I don't know how your back's going to hold out. And I was about to say, even if your back is giving you issues, you can ride around with me all day long and just, have a couple of drinks. You can be an honorary marshal.
And so now, since I said that about you and the 50 drunks in a bar, you're not inviting me?
No, I'll still invite you. You're good. You're good.
Moj declined the penalty. Mike, thanks so much for doing
it.
this. Great insight, and we look forward to having you on again.
You got it. Anytime.
Thanks, Mike.
That is Mike Pereira. That was a lot of fun. He's seen it all. I mean, he's officiated so many games. He's been involved running the program, evaluating the officials. Not a better guy to talk to on these topics.
Yeah, just one of the good guys in the business as well. Great guy, and glad to have him as a friend as well.